Hey, everybody. So excited to be here today to get this class recorded. My name is Marguerite Green. I'm formerly of Sprout. We are, continue to be, I'm just no longer with Sprout, a technical assistance organization for farmers and gardeners throughout Southeast Louisiana. We work as part of a larger coalition of technical assistance organizations that serve Louisiana's farmers called the Louisiana Small Scale Agriculture Coalition. And so this training is one of our pieces of technical assistance for farmers in Louisiana when they're working on figuring out how to set wholesale and retail prices. So, this presentation is really about understanding the strategy and the way that you're setting prices, because what we'll talk about today is that there's not one equation for your farm to be able to figure out how to set prices. But small scale farmers often try to just look around them and see what other people are charging or Google things, and that might not be the best strategy for your business. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about what goes into deciding what your prices are and for which different market outlet. So, in this class, I want to give a caveat. It is a class that is specifically for if you are running a business or intending to run a business. When I say that, I always like to make sure to clarify that people understand that I do not need or want you to be running a business, especially if you are just like growing food because that is what lights you up. It gives you joy in this world. Like, you do not have to do that as a business. In fact, it is a very beautiful and empowered choice to decide that you do not want to do that as a business. And so the reason that I make this distinction is not because you won't get something from this class if you're not growing for a business. You still might have methods of selling if you're not growing as a business. And so you might be able to glean information that's helpful for you, but it's that you don't need to make a profit in a particular way if you're not trying to run a business. So that's really the line that we're trying to walk here, is that if you are trying to support yourself or others or pay a living wage for growing food, then you need to treat that like running a business, and you need to be figuring out what you have to charge for the products that you're growing. And again, if that like oops you out, that's great. You should grow food for your community and not try to make that what pays your bills. So that is the caveat that I like to lead with, because sometimes when we get into this stuff about like negotiation or asking for more or like, charging what you're worth and all of that, people start being like, that's not what I got in this for. I got in this because I love, watching the soil come back to life. And that is awesome. And I understand how sometimes those things feel at odds. So anyway, I want to kick it off with a little bit of a apparently ChatGPT thinks that all people who are having pricing conversations in the world are just men. So keep that in mind until the very last slide where I told it I need you to not just put men in this slide. But I guess that has a lot to do with what our hive mind thinks business looks like, which is why classes like this are important. So, one of the most classic conversations that we ever hear about farmers and new customers having, and there are a couple different forms of this, right? Is that a new customer will call a farmer up and they'll say, "Hey, I'm looking to buy local food. What do you have?" And the farmer's like, "Well, I have everything. What do you want to buy?" And the customer's like, "Oh, well, what do you have?" And the farmer's like, "Well, it's May, so what do you want to buy?" And this can go either back and forth for a while, or both parties get kind of confused by each other and they find a way off of the phone. But the point here is that a lot of the communication between a farm business and an intended customer is not working because people don't have the communication skills to figure out like how to talk to a new audience for them. So most people purchasing local food in Louisiana don't have an experience purchasing wholesale or intermediate wholesale quantities of local food, because we don't have that robust of a wholesale or intermediate wholesale like local food economy. And so a lot of the time people are taking their first shot or coming back after having tried before and failed at purchasing local food. And same side of the opposite coin is that most farmers are selling retail, or they're finding some other kind of or way to sell like aggregated that's ending up not really being like true wholesale or intermediate wholesale. So some of the language of how we have these discussions really matters. For instance, if a new customer calls and they're like, I need 1,000 pounds of eggplant. The farmer's like, okay, maybe they have it. So how much would you charge for $1,000 of eggplant? And this one is the classic one that I hear all the time. Is the farmer says, I don't know. How much do you want to pay? And the customer answers honestly, I want to pay an insultingly low amount of money because they were asked how much they want to pay. And people don't want to pay money. And the farmer's like, I'm insulted. Bye. And the customer's like, wait a minute. I was told to just say a number. I mean, this is not how it usually works for me. I mean, you asked me a question. And the farmer's like, man, nobody knows how to buy local food. And the conversation could have gone completely differently if that farmer knew the numbers of the prices that they were actually trying to get and their relationships to quantity. So, when you have, let's say, a produce broker having this conversation, the customer calls and says, I need 1,000 pounds of eggplant. And the broker says, okay, I'll do that for $6,000. And then the customer's like, what? No, my low number is $1,500. And they're like, no, absolutely not. I know what the market looks like. I know what I paid for this eggplant because I bought it from a farmer. $5,000 is my floor. And the customer's like, fine, I actually had $5,000 this whole time. Great, I can do $5,000 if you can deliver. And the customer's like, or the wholesaler's like, yeah, you know what? That actually meets our minimum because they know what their minimum to deliver is because they know what their prices are and they know what the needs of their business are is. And they say, our delivery days are Thursdays because they've worked that out, right? They know my business works if I deliver to that city on Thursdays. And the customer says, I really need it sooner than that. Can I get it tomorrow? And because the broker has figured out the logistics of their business and they have these clear reasons they're making these decisions, they're able to say, no, I can't do tomorrow, but would Wednesday help? And so in this scenario, simply because the customer has answers that move the conversation forward. And you know what? I shouldn't say it's like simply because of that, but because both parties are educated in how to speak to each other, and they're both trying to make the relationship work, it moves further along to a sale. So when we're setting prices, we have to think about conflicting needs. Setting the right price for your product is complicated. You are thinking about what goes into making your product, and low prices move products at a smaller profit margin or more or no profit margin. What do I mean by that? When I'm saying a low price on a product makes more people buy it, theoretically, right? Something cheap, a sale makes people buy it. But then the amount of money that you make from the price that you put in or the cost of goods that you put into growing that product and the small uptick that you have, maybe small uptick that you have in that price to sell it to a customer, that profit margin is small if you're going low and trying to get it to move. Or in many cases, not even just in some cases, there might be no profit margin. You might actually be losing money when you're selling a product if you were to consider how much work went into growing it. So high prices push customers away, theoretically, but without clear data on how high prices are, like what is too high, it's really difficult to know where the ceiling is. And this is because every market is different, every food system is different, and every product is different. How we value each product is different. Some products feel like luxuries, and some products feel like something that you expect to be able to get really cheap at a market. For instance, like the lowly onion. A lot of people blow through onions for every meal. They're going to have like a mirepoix as the base to every meal. So they don't think of an onion as something they're going to spend a lot of money on, but they might think of like the first heirloom tomato of the season as something that they're willing to spend more money on. So we have values and like decisions that we're making in our head as customers about what we're willing to spend. And it's very hard for you as the farmer to be able to infer those things. So that's why it's important for you to actually know what it costs you to grow something. Because if you can infer that people don't want to pay a lot for an onion, but you know it costs you a lot to grow an onion, then you probably shouldn't be selling onions, right? And so the other thing is that when I talk about the market, I mean sort of the way economics work in the larger system. So saying the market as in like the invisible hand, the market, like capital T, capital M. And then I can be talking about a market, which is a place that food is being sold. That could be a farmer's market, or that could be you selling to a wholesaler, like you're selling through a market channel. So the market is the larger system in which we all exist, and then a market is the market channel that you are using. And none of this remains rational or predictable all the time. Why? Because people do not make completely rational or predictable decisions. We have a lot of things going on inside of us, stress about our own money, and a desire to get like a piece of produce that we're emotional about, and those things can create larger market trends. So these things are not predictable or rational. But bringing us quickly back to where's my little, there it is, to your high school or economics class really quickly. Remember that we have what was called a market clearing price. So that market clearing price, when you look at it on the chart, if everyone remembers this from like micro or macroeconomics, I don't remember which one it is where the quantity of the object that you have that you are trying to sell and the price that you are trying to sell it at perfectly meets the amount of demand and supply. If you were to set the object that you were trying to sell at that perfect market clearing price, it would mean that you would leave every farmer's market with a completely empty table and you would have charged the exact perfect price to have sold the exact amount of quantity that you have. It's this pie in the sky number. You're never going to have the market clearing price, right? Have you ever left a market where every single object on the table was fully gone? You had not too much and not too few of any object. And no one that day complained about price. So that would be the market clearing price. So we're never going to get there because that's in a vacuum. But what we're trying to do is figure out something sort of like a market clearing price for each product that you have. So when we're choosing a pricing strategy, it's going to depend on what it costs you to grow the product first and foremost. If you don't think about what it costs you to grow the product, then you aren't incorporating the most important thing, which is what is your break even point to continue to sell the product. Then you're bringing in factors of who you're selling to, where you're selling it at, what the price they might be willing to pay is, and what other producers charge for similar products, because that's going to have to do with competition around you, right? And you're not going to set that price once, it's going to be a living number. So if there's a drought, the cost of food might go up because the supply of it might go down. If there is a huge market influx because everybody that year decided to grow papaya, then your price might need to go down a little bit because everybody's like, I've got papaya coming out of my ears. I'm not going to pay you $10 for papaya. So with our customers, we want to be thinking about in a small or local food system, like what can't be found, what's not replicable at big box stores, what is special to our food economy and our agricultural economy and our cultural foodways. That is often a place to look into and think about what are the needs that you're fulfilling for your community. And then is your product a luxury or a necessity? That goes back to my question about the onion. Now, I cannot live without onions. I use two onions for every meal. And I hope that no one immediately went, yeah, I know, I can tell. But I use a lot of onions, and I usually try to grow my own onions because I'm in my home garden because I don't want to go buy an onion at the farmer's market. It's not what I'm going to go spend my money on at the farmer's market. And I also don't want to buy an onion at Whole Foods because that is not where I want to spend my money. And I don't want a junky little conventional onion either. So I grow my own onions. But is that something that your customers are looking for as a luxury where they might go out of their way an extra mile to get a local onion? Only you know that about your community. And then the next thing you want to be bringing in is like, what is the objective of you running this business? Why are you doing this? Again, if your objective is to feed your community and it is not to feed your community and simultaneously take care of yourself, your family, your community in terms of like economic success, then not a business, in which case, don't worry so much about pricing. But if your objective is to feed your community and be able to live a fulfilling life yourself, then your values are going to bring you to try to make the most competitive price that you can while you still make ends meet. And then what is the value proposition that you're showing to your customers? What makes your business different, what makes the product that you're growing different than them going and getting the analogous product at Conseco's, at Walmart, what have you. Like, why are they coming to your farm or to your farmer's market or to the distributor that's selling your product for your product? Is it simply because it's local? Is it because the quality is better? Is it because you're growing something that cannot be bought anywhere else or exported, something that's culturally significant? So, when you're taking all of these things into account, you have to understand that your product might help fill a gap in market. Like something might not be being sold in our market system right now, but also always remember that some gaps in our market are not filled because they are not profitable to fill. I've seen farmers markets do a really helpful thing where they show a list of what's available at their market usually, and then they'll also show a list of things that they don't find at their market that usually, giving that to new growers to say, here are the things that are actually market gaps. That's such a helpful tool. But your job as a grower, as a farmer, is to take that list and make sure that what's on it you can actually sell because something might not be at market because it's not desired at market or because it's not profitable to sell at market. All right. So now we're going to talk about the actual pricing strategies. There are quite a few ways. This is like also back to high school economics to set your prices. I'm going to really focus on one, but I'm going to give you the quickest overview of a couple of the other ones as well. I recommend that everyone use a pricing strategy that is like the simplest, which is called cost plus. We will talk the most about cost plus, so I'm going to quickly touch on the other ones. Competitive is pretty intuitive. Competitive is the pricing strategy that comes into play when product value is high. So you have a competitive edge when you are selling a product that you are pricing with a competitive pricing strategy. It's best used in market situations where there are a lot of similar products and the price is the only difference between products. That is so rarely how a local food system works. I would say it is definitionally never how a local food system works because though the products may seem similar, people are going to have relationships with your farm over the farm next to them and vice versa. So you want to think about whether your product is actually similar and your capability to differentiate. I would say that maybe in some of the really big markets across the country where there's hundreds and hundreds of farms at them, the one where they shut down city blocks and, they sprawl outwards and there's the same table, there's a lot of people growing the same stuff. A competitive pricing strategy might make more sense in a situation like that, but it can be really difficult in an open market setting. So when you are competitively pricing to compete with other people, that lower price that you're having to go down means lower profit margins, and that's less product or that's less profit for your farm. But also, in some ways, it's a race to the bottom because if we're always competing down for each other, then we're never doing the work of actually boosting a local food system up. So when we think about our values in growing food for our communities, we want to be walking that line of making prices that support farmers and also prices that are like achievable for our community members to be able to buy them. And then it's the work of policy organizations and governments to try to make SNAP matching more possible and try to work on other policy mechanisms to make that food more affordable and for us to work together to like feed and cook each other with each other. But in a market setting, I do not recommend a race to the bottom, right? It doesn't really end up serving the long-term growth of a local food economy. So, values based pricing. This is pricing based on how much the customer believes your food is worth. So, that is like you are less selling the food and you are more selling, or whatever it is in this scenario, and you are more selling the experience, the values of being a customer of your business. So, it takes your customers' wants and needs into the equation, and the unique or value added products that you might bring to market are a good place to introduce some values based pricing, especially if it's a low cost of production value add product. So teas, salves, things like that. that might be a lower cost of production because you might be harvesting herbs or growing perennials or something like that. Values-based pricing comes in there because there's also, a place where values-based pricing can be helpful too is if hard-won wisdom or knowledge was brought in to like make the product. When we're looking at what the experience of pricing a product that's like growing a cucumber, obviously you have to like learn to grow a cucumber, and that is also wisdom and knowledge. But sometimes when people are making those value add products that come from their own cultural foodways or come from their community, values based pricing is helpful because it might just be a dried herb that's been crushed and made into a tea. And the actual cost of production of that might be pretty low, but the product that you're selling might mean more to you and the people that are buying it. I have an example here. Oh, yeah. So a pro is that you can set a higher price point for your product. The strategy works well for like coveted, beautiful, luxury, and specialty items. So you can use this pricing strategy when all the other vegetables on your table might be a cost plus pricing strategy. You could do like a product with a different pricing strategy. So I said, think when shishitos were first at market, whatever that was, like 2011, not a lot of growers were growing them, so it was like this special little thing to have a shishito pepper and to like talk to people about how you cook them and blah blah blah. And when I say 2011, I mean like here in New Orleans. It was 2011 when shishitos were coming into our market. I know that that has moved in different paces in different places. So amorphous gardens or veggie specialty products. I've been doing this presentation for many years, so I am sure things have changed since I first wrote this. But like, oh, blue butterfly peas were first like introduced in the New Orleans market as a plant from Mizell's, and people were like falling over themselves to go buy that plant. So anyway, when you have something that feels special or luxury or coveted, you can sort of price with that in mind and not just the cost of goods sold. It requires a solid brand, really good products, great marketing, and good customer service. If selling someone something that is values based only works once, it didn't work. So the idea here is that you are selling someone something, and it part of what you are thinking about is how it makes them feel to buy it. So if you sell someone something and it is a gimmick and they cared about you and they wanted the special little thing and they are developing a relationship with you, and it is a scam, then you have hurt their trust and they will not come back. And that is a short term win, and it is a short sighted win because it is not building up a sort of collaborative food system where they can trust the products that they purchased from you. These are the pricing strategies that they just do not apply to local food. Basically, keystone pricing is considered when you just double your wholesale costs. Target return is when you base your product pricing on what the return investment you need to be when paying off your debt that your business maybe took on at the beginning. Penetration pricing is the idea of hooking people with a low, low price. It's a very bad method for pricing local agricultural products. And I would say it's a very bad model for pricing anything. We've all fallen victim to penetration pricing. I'm sure you've recognized it when you like sign onto a product that charges you monthly and then it like goes up, whatever those the tape subscription companies that used to like write off and get like a CD subscription, and it was like $9 for like 10 CDs, and then it was all of a sudden like $600 for like one CD. Um, anyway, I'm sure someone out there will remember what I'm talking about. And then price skimming, it's the opposite. And price skimming being like you're setting your price high. And so cost plus is where we are. Let me see. Just want to go back and make sure I am where I think I am. So, when we're thinking about our pricing strategy, you have to consider the avenues that you're selling into. So, I have divided for like the way my brain works, I divide this into three avenues: retail or direct sales, bulk or intermediate wholesale, and then true wholesale. Retail or direct sales is when you're selling to the farmers market customers, to individuals, when you're popping up at other businesses, like anything where you are selling directly to the end customer. A roadside stand would count in that. Bulk or intermediate wholesale is something that's more like a restaurant, a value added producer, like someone who's making a jam or jelly with your product, unless they're a large value added producer. You might be selling into a smaller CSA. Sometimes people call that aggregating. If you're selling a product to someone and they're paying you before they're paid, that's less aggregating and that's more selling someone a product. And then a smaller grocery store, a local co-op, that would be more like a bulk or intermediate wholesale. And then you have true wholesale. True wholesale is going to be a larger grocery store, a wholesaler who's going to resell it, a big CSA, something like the food bank or farm to institutional customers. Those are going to be your true wholesale customers. You have to know the general cost for your product. So I've been saying that throughout this, like, you want the product cost and then you're going above that. But a lot of people do not know the general cost of their product. Actually, I would say 99% of farmers do not think about what the actual cost of producing an individual cucumber is. So if you don't know what it costs to grow your product, then you don't know how to price or negotiate it. You do not want to get in the weeds with customers about what it costs to grow your cucumber. You want to know that information for yourself, but I've definitely seen people, because they didn't figure out how to value that labor of their own, sort of get up in arms when a customer is like, that's too much for that. And immediately, because you haven't done the work of pricing it or figuring out who your customer is, that feedback can actually feel like someone is saying like you're not worth that, or the labor that you put in is not worth that. And we don't want to get out of control like that. We don't want to like start assuming that everyone knows what it takes to like labor in that way. So I tell people, just like set your price and figure it out so that you're honoring yourself, and that way you're not putting it in other people's hands to say whether or not that time you spent growing that cucumber is worth that to them. Most growers set their prices based on a sort of nebulous understanding of other growers' prices, or like a game of telephone. The day that I started at market, no one told me how to price anything, and I literally pretended to walk around the market every after everyone was set up and just like looked at prices, because I just didn't know where you were supposed to ask, or like how you figure out what you're pricing. And I did not come to market thinking about, it's like, what am I going to price things? But I didn't come in going, I know what it costs me to do this, so this is what the price has to be. Instead, I was like, okay, like the market will set the price in a sort of nebulous way, and I just have to follow it. In order to know what the price of growing stuff is, you will need a few seasons of records, and you'll have to know how much growing things costs you. There are lovely price indexes out there. We have one that is going to help you figure out, and we'll link it. That's going to help you figure out sort of a general market rate, and it's a good place to start if you don't have a season of records, because how if you haven't had a season, you don't know what it costs you to grow. So there is going to be some estimation. This class, particularly too, is also meant for like a different part of the process. It's more for people who are sort of generally trying to figure out their prices and maybe don't have that level of records. We have some really amazing resources and trainers who specifically focus on helping you figure out what your cost to grow is. So if that's something you want help on, like developing those records and digging in really deep to that stuff, we'd love to connect you with some resources about that at LSAC, the Louisiana Small Scale Agriculture Coalition. This is sort of like a proto version of those sorts of resources. We're not getting into the records, we're talking more about the pricing here, but we have resources to help you figure out the nitty gritty of how much it costs to grow the food that you're growing. So, in making sales, you want to set those prices based on the cost of goods sold, that that cost of your product and labor. In retail, it's the last stage of that product's for sale life, and retail is the most labor intensive way to sell a product. Your time is valuable, even if you like going to markets. So think about it like this. In retail, You are doing all the labor of growing the product. You're setting up, you're loading everything in the car, you're going to market, you're setting up your market table, and then you're sitting at your market table and you are having individual conversations about each piece that you're selling. So the labor of going to market, that is part of the cost of selling that product because it is, you could be doing something else with your time and making money in a different way, and you're not. You're there selling the product. So you need to think about like, what if I broke my leg and I had to hire someone else to come do this? So the most labor is going into retail. Retail also allows you to set a fluctuating price and work with the end user better. And some people are really in farming because they want to be having these conversations with their end user. That's like part of the connectivity for them. But retail, most labor. Bulk and intermediate wholesale is the second highest amount of labor. Some customers who are buying bulk and intermediate wholesale might have to pay a retail price to buy at this price point because it might not be beneficial to you to be selling at that level, right? If you're selling everything retail and you have a retail outlet and everybody wants what you have retail and someone calls you and they're like, "Hey, can I get a cut on the price of the blueberries that you're selling? They're the only blueberries in town, but I'll buy four flats of them." And you have a retail customer that comes to market and buys four flats of them. That's not really a deal for you. So you might have to say, "I can't really cut you a deal because I sell stuff through market. You can come pick up that much through market." Or there might be another reason you want to develop the relationship, so you might give a small price break. But just naming that when we're making these bulk sales that are not huge sales, it doesn't mean that they necessarily command a huge reduction in the cost to the end user. Don't confuse bulk and wholesale. Small enough numbers of purchases, even if they are bigger than retail purchases, might only command a tiny discount. And then wholesale is going to be the least labor that you're putting into a sale. And that means you are also getting the lowest price. Wholesale prices are going to be the lowest that you'll go. So setting your other prices to relate to that, if you intend to sell wholesale, is a smart idea. Meaning you are figuring out what is the lowest amount that you want to make. If you were to sell everything in your business wholesale, what would you need to make doing that to still make an income or to still make a living or pay off the debt of the farm, whatever your goals are? And then that means when you go to bulk or intermediate wholesale, the cost goes up a little bit because you've added more labor. And when you go to retail, the cost goes up even more because you've added more labor. So you have to know that general cost, and you're going to start with your variable costs. Your variable costs are the costs of things that if you don't cover, you will have to shut down in a short amount of time as a farm, unless you're subsidizing the farm with other earnings, which is the case for most farms, but we still want you to run sustainable farms. So I need you to figure these numbers out. Um, so your variable costs are going to be things like fertilizer, seed, gas, and your labor. Okay. You shut down in a short amount of time. If you do not cover your variable costs, you start hemorrhaging money. Then you want to add in the ownership costs or the fixed costs. So think of your variable costs as the cost of your inputs, and then the fixed cost as the cost of owning the business. So that's your depreciation. It's how much money you lose in the asset that you own every year. So how much your tractor is devalued every year, the depreciation of it, the interest, the repairs, taxes that you're paying, insurance. If you cover these two things, you will meet the break-even cost of your doing your business because you're covering the cost of your inputs, everything that you buy, and then the cost of doing business, your ownership costs. So every item that you sell needs to contribute partially to your ownership costs. If you don't cover your ownership costs, you will be able to operate longer before you have to shut down. But unless you're covering these from your off-farm income, like we talked about a minute ago, but that means your farm is not financially sustainable and you're parasitizing that off-farm income. Again, that's the choice that some people make, but I just want you to make that choice with clear eyes and like the most information you can possibly have. And then this last thing is your profitable price. So then this is the price that you need to survive in the long run. I pulled these definitions from Cornell's Small Farms program. So basically, you've got inputs. the cost of doing business, and then profit are the three things that you're adding together as your big bucket categories. So your wholesale price should be your variable costs, those inputs, your fixed costs, the cost of doing business, and then your profitable price at your wholesale. That is equaling your price for selling wholesale, right? So this is the labor that you did to get to that wholesale sale, which in this case would be low. You don't consider the relationship building as part of that price. So the like day that you met the person, if you met them at a party and they were like, "Oh, I'm a wholesale buyer," like you're not that cost is the sunk cost. But relationship maintenance, meaning calling them, travel time, customer relationships, that all needs to be considered there. And it should be the lowest amount compared to retail. If a wholesale customer is taking up the amount of time that all your farmers market customers are taking up, then you've got a problem. So you're thinking about how much money or how much time you save offloading 200 pounds of lettuce in two giant bags as opposed to one big grocery versus 400 half-pound bags at market. The other places your labor is coming in is the bagging, it's the conversations with the customers. And again, this is not a value judgment. I prefer retail, but it's just asking you to think these things through. Then your intermediate wholesale price, that bulk middle column pricing. Same strategy. You're doing your variable costs, your fixed cost, and your profitable price at intermediate wholesale. So what is that? I interchanged the word there, but that what is that profitable price, intermediate wholesale or bulk? That's the labor you did to get to the sale, which in this case would be a medium amount of labor. This tier of sales is often a specialty product for a restaurant, going into a smaller item. It might be going to another CSA, like we talked about. So this price usually needs to make sense for both parties, and often you can negotiate your delivering and packaging here. So you're probably not doing half-pound bags of lettuce for a price like this because you might be delivering to a restaurant, so you might be doing bins. Just make sure this isn't just you delivering a farmer's market to a chef. It has to be mutually beneficial. So if you're giving people a discounted price and they're not buying much more than you sell at a market, that is really just not a bi-directional relationship. So think about the long-term development of your food system when you're doing these sales. And then your retail price. So, how do you figure out your retail price? It's the labor that you did to get to the sale, which in this case would be the highest. You want to always be thinking about how you pay for that labor if you couldn't be there and charging it as part of your variable costs. You want to set your prices with your farm community in mind. It doesn't matter if you have the privilege of selling stuff at no profit. That is a great privilege. Use it to help others along. Donate produce if you can afford to, barter with neighbors, but help keep those market prices stable and competitive for the folks who are trying to make a living. And so you want to set your prices in this order, starting with that true wholesale. What is your floor? And then moving to, okay, so if that's what the minimum I can make, how do I add more onto that? And then more onto that. Okay, been a lot of talking. And I usually take questions during these slides, so it's sort of it's like a wall of sound coming from me at the people who are watching this. But usually at this point, we've gotten to talk through a couple little things, and now I want to do some closing thoughts. So some thoughts on overcharging. Great, overcharge. Good luck. That, if somebody buys it, that's theirs. It is not your job to, watch other people's pocketbooks. So if you say a high price and somebody wants to pay you that price, that's great. I want farmers to make a good living. But I also want you to make sure that you know that when you're getting that top dollar, what the market can continue to bear. I think I have, wait, let me find it. Okay. So one time I had someone tell me that they were doing $14 a pound for eggplant. And I was like, sorry? And it was because they had looked up how much eggplant, Googled price per pound eggplant. And this is what came up on Amazon. So Amazon.com was selling eggplant by the pound to ship it to your house from God knows where. I don't know what the seg plan is. I'm actually tempted to buy it. I think at the time there was like also a watermelon and like summer squash as well. And I was like, can I expense this for work to see what happens when you order a pound of eggplant off of Amazon? Because no, this wasn't like deliveries from Whole Foods. This is ordering a pound of eggplant from like somewhere in the world. Just knowing that like someone is setting their price at $14 a pound, we have no idea if this is selling or not. But if in a local market you say, I want $14 a pound for eggplant and someone goes for it, that's awesome. I'm so glad you got your $14 a pound for eggplant. If you start anticipating that as you grow your field, as you scale up, everyone will pay $14 a pound for eggplant. That's not bounded in reality. And so, as much as we want the cost of food to support farmers making a living wage, the only way that we push on that is not just going to be pushing prices up for consumers, especially as all of the cost of living is going up for everyone. So we need to be thinking about this in a comprehensive way. How do we get the highest price for farmers so that they can make ends meet while also thinking about what can our communities afford? So don't just take one thing into account. And if you can overcharge and get a good price from somebody who had a windfall and wants to spend it with local farmers, that's a fine thing to do. Just understand that you cannot build your business off of that model. I don't ever encourage an individual farmer to have to burden like shoulder the entire burden of the food system and go, no, don't give me too much money. If you give me too much money, our market will be imbalanced. That's not your job as a farmer, but just know it's not always going to happen. How do you know when you're overcharging? If you're getting a retail price or above for a wholesale sale, you're overcharging. And again, that's fine. There's like a negative implication on overcharging. I don't mean that. Um, you might be overcharging if you or they look at what you're delivering and you're like, oh, I have absolutely done that. Like I used to sell edible flowers to restaurants, and I would say, this is the price per pound. And then I'd go out and harvest a pound and I'd look at the pound and I'd be like, oh, I would be mad if this showed up at my restaurant and that's what I had to pay for it. So that's a helpful indication is if you're like, ooh, how would I feel as my customer? Again, doesn't mean you need to turn around. They might have a reason. They might think you're the coolest person in the world. They might be trying to be your friend just by purchasing from you. I don't know. Not my business. Um, or if you tell other people the price and they scoff. This one's always complicated because maybe they're just like not used to getting what they're worth too. But just, like be listening and looking and understanding what people around you are feeling. And if you say, yeah, I think I'm going to charge $14 a pound for eggplant, and a farmer who's been growing for like 20 years next to you is like, good luck. It's a data point. Take it as a data point, right? Doesn't mean that you're wrong, but it also might mean that you want to just like investigate what kind of prices the market can bear. Okay, I told you overcharging, do it. Just keep something in mind. Undercharging, please don't do it. There are so many ways to try to live your values out that don't include undervaluing yourself, your own labor, other farmers. The context matters, right? And your values matter. So the concept isn't rigid, it's a framework. So can you undercharge in situations? Absolutely. Are you building a relationship with someone? Are you trying to offload something that you don't need, but you still want to break even? Are you serving a community need? Those are all valid reasons, but don't just like ambiently undercharge all the time because the idea of trying to support yourself makes you feel guilty. One of the ways that I encourage people to do that, if there is a reason that they're undercharging, and I did this for years, is show that on an invoice. Do a discount, right? Even if it's 100% discount. And that way you're building like reciprocal relationship with people that helps everybody understand what you're bringing to the table. So if you want to donate something, but you know it would have cost $100, it is A-okay and good for your records for you to say, here is a $0 invoice that shows that this would have been $100 and I am fully discounting it. And invoices like that can actually really matter for your record keeping. If at the end of the year you want to remember how many pounds you sold, or if you want to like show, maybe in your taxes, like there are all sorts of reasons for having a record of food that you didn't sell and showing that it was a donation or that it was discounted. Also, if you're ever going to make the decision to sell someone something for a really low price, be clear with them if you don't want them to share that price with someone else. Because absolutely, if you give someone a really good price, they'll be like, whoa, can you believe how much this okra cost? And then all of a sudden, someone like you don't know is calling you for a bunch of okra, and you're like, oh no, that was like a friends and family discount. So if you're giving someone a friends and family discount, let them know. That's an okay thing to do. People love it. I will like eat it up, even if the discount is like 4%. I'm like, oh, you think I'm your friend? Or maybe you think I'm your family. You never know. So, we have some resources here, and the reason I'm breezing past them is because this is a pre-recorded, session. So we have pricing data that we pulled together on the Louisiana Small Scale Agriculture Coalition website. We hope to continue to update it and create more resources. There is also the Agricultural Marketing Service at the USDA publishes a specialty crop price report. Again, that's going to be aggregate data from across the country for specialty crops. And it does not mean that that is the price that you should be going off of. But sometimes it's really helpful to have a jumping off point because even like I haven't given this presentation in a year and I was like, how much do eggplant cost a pound now? Because I grow my own eggplant, I don't purchase eggplant. And so it's like you feel a little bit disconnected or I sorry, like got tell a quick anecdote is that I'm going to visit a friend and she said, "What do you guys eat?" And I was like, "Don't worry about us. We mostly just eat eggs." Because I have chickens. And so to me, I was like, "We're easy. We just eat eggs." But I'm going to like a rural part of the country where eggs cost $9 a dozen. So to her, what I was saying was like, "Don't worry, I just need like the nicest and most luxurious good that you could possibly have." So prices fluctuate, is what I'm saying with that anecdote. And who knows what eggs will cost when you're watching this recording. And with that in mind, you want to be able to look at these baselines and be like, okay, well, if in Iowa a conventional eggplant costs 2.48 a pound, then like maybe here in my metropolis, an organic eggplant is going to cost more in the 350 range or something like that. These numbers will also be out of date by the time anybody looks at them again, but I always want producers, especially value-added producers, to watch the cost of their inputs. Please do not buy retail inputs to sell retail products. That is, so for instance, if you are going to big box stores to buy your seeds, to buy your soil, you are paying all sorts of markups and taxes on your inputs, or if you're buying your fertilizer that way. And there are obviously reasons why it might be harder. Like it is harder to get organic inputs on our farms in the deep south, especially in Louisiana. We just don't have many distributors. But do your best to get wholesale or bulk pricing when you're purchasing inputs because you're going to be paying taxes every step along the way and all of those markups. And then you're going to have to pass all of that along to your customer. And if they're willing to pay that price, think about how much more of that could be your profit if you were purchasing wholesale for your inputs. In my parting words to you, you unfortunately have to speak with confidence and knowledge if you want to sell agricultural goods in this world. You have to be like the guy in the suit in the ChatGPT cartoon, who like has a plan to help move the conversation forward because you are the person who has decided to run the business and you are the person who's putting yourself out there in the world to try to sell your product. So it is on you, it is incumbent upon you to try to move those conversations forward. The unfortunate truth of our food system in Louisiana, and hopefully this is different when someone's watching this, is that we do not know how to handle much back and forth of small farm negotiations. There is not enough demand or money to learn how to have those back and forth negotiations with the bulk buyers and the intermediate and the wholesale buyers right now. Um, without you having to be a strong advocate in those conversations too. So most of our larger purchasers in the state don't have the time and interest in going back and forth with you like that. And unfortunately, a lot of them do not have the values to, they're not here to develop a local food system. They're here to make their bottom line. So until we have a culture shift where people are willing to put in more work to get those local products, you have to be able to communicate at a level, at a standard that is going to be similar to what they're getting when they're talking to a broker. Your product is different. I am not saying it is all the same, but they are not going to just out of the kindness and goodness of their heart be better at communicating with you or be able to do more back and forth just because it's local food. So, unfortunately, we do have to step it up on the producer side. And then don't prioritize a single sale. Prioritize our food system. I know that's a lot to put on you, and I said I wouldn't put that on the individual shoulders of a farmer, and I'm not. It is not any of our one responsibility. But why else are we working out in the heat? And it is, nasty in the Louisiana summertime. Why are we growing food in our communities if not to try to create a more robust food system that serves us all better? That's more equitable, that feeds more people. And so, with that in mind, like we are doing incredibly long work in trying to change how we get access to food in this country. And so, don't get myopic and only focus on one sale and make a decision that might hurt your bottom line or yourself or the development of our community. Think about the long term when you're selling food because this is a long term movement we are trying to build. And with that, I will pause for questions.
Thank you so much for this. Um, I have a couple of questions, but I wanted to give anybody else an opportunity to hop on and ask anything that might have come up. All right. Well, then I'll throw I'll throw one at a time out instead of just
Just all rapid fire at me.
yeah, rapid fire. Here's four different things. I was wondering if you, specifically in the context of Louisiana markets and direct sale, if you've worked with many folks who are using sliding scales as a
Mm.
pricing strategy, and like how do you set your prices within that scale? Um, when is that appropriate? And is that how are customers and buyers in Louisiana sort of reacting to that strategy in your experience?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. So just to explain for anyone who's maybe not aware is like sliding scale pricing being that let's put it on its feet in this way. Like if someone's approaching your market table, and a way I've seen this done a lot is with people who sell plants, is that it's not really like a full pay what you want, but it's like if it's this is our bottom price, and if you're able to pay more, that allows us to have this spectrum of pricing so that people who can't pay as much have the opportunity to pay less. And if you feel like you are blessed in your life, you have privilege, then you can pay more. And there's, stops along the way. It's a spectrum. Um, I have not seen anyone continue that pricing. I've seen a lot of people start with that pricing, and that's not necessarily me saying like it doesn't work, because I think we have a propensity to be like, if something changes, that means it didn't work. And I would like to see that as like it worked, possibly it worked for that moment. Like maybe it didn't work, but also maybe it worked for the time that it was being employed, and then a different technique needed to be used. I have seen that happen with businesses as they grow, and it seems to be very influenced by like what the climate of the world is. Like I have definitely heard people, especially in 2020, be like, everyone is paying the top end of the scale. Like I'm going to the farmer's market and people are like throwing money at us and just saying like feed other people, make sure everybody else is getting food. I did a bouquet subscription like this during the pandemic specifically, and did like a pay what you can sliding scale on bouquets where we told people we're donating all of the money, so like this is the range. And that was really interesting for me because I was able to then see data, which is that by and large, most people do pay the low end of the range. I can't compare that to like what their actual financial data is. But I have found that most people use the low end of the range when talking about agricultural goods. Funny enough, I talked to a mental health care provider about that strategy the other day, and that person said that most people pay the top of the end of the range. So that just gives me like some indication that people are like thinking about what they're paying for on a sliding scale differently. But all that is to say, if we were to assume, you would need to go into that pricing strategy assuming every single person paid the bottom end of the range, because that could possibly happen. So if you set your price saying every single person pays the bottom end of this range, and what then is my break even plus plus the correct, like we would go back to, can I go back? Yeah. So you would want to set your bottom end of your price as being probably your intermediate wholesale price around there, right? Um, you would probably, it would depend on the market, right? So actually what you would want to do is still have your base price be your base price. So if you're going retail and you're using your labor in that way, you would want it to be your base price. And then you actually want to be going up from there into what a, not just a profit that you'd like to make is, but like, or not just a profit that you need to make is, but a profit you like to make is, right? So if we're talking about a bouquet, let's say we're pricing it at $20, that's my retail price. That means if I make my retail price, then I can pay for my time, I can pay for my input, and I can pay for the overhead of running my business. I might have a sliding scale where I'm like, I don't have health care. That might not be factored in to my price. I do now, but at times I didn't, right? So if you're saying I would love to aspirationally be able to pay for healthcare, that's not just, the marketplace plan that I'm being given, right? Like I would like to pay for vision or dental or something. So then you can say my bouquets are $20 to $40 sliding scale. So if every single person gives you $20 for your bouquet and you sell out, then you're still fine. You're not going home hungry. And if a bunch of people give you $40, then you have more indication of like what the market might be able to bear, and you're able to actually start investing back into yourself and your business. So my proposal for that would be, if it's something that's important to you to offer to your community, that's a really cool model, and still set that bottom price as a price that you could live with if every single person chose that lowest price. Not that I think that they will, but you need to be able to like prepare for that.
Beautiful. I love the example of health insurance and like bringing those scenarios into pricing. Um, Even though, yeah, that's sort of a basic need, an essential in my
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, want to pay a little extra to make sure I can go to the doctor?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny how much, like, because you get into these details when you're talking with farmers. Like, I've talked to so many farmers, especially urban farmers, just, and I say that because it's about scale, right? Where they'll be like, no, I'm actually making money. And I'm like, oh, cool. So, like, what are you making? Like tell me more about that. And you'll get into it, and it's like what they mean is I am still able to pay my rent, and I have not been actively hungry yet. And I have a car, and you're like, okay, cool, but like, what happens if you throw out your back, or like what are you gonna do when you're 70, right? And those are boring questions when you're a 20-year-old. They become very important questions as you get older, and or as you get a bad back or whatever it is. And they're also like often questions that, depending on like what your money script is in your head or your lot in life, like some people are asking those of themselves real early, and some people are like not asking them for a while. So yeah, whether healthcare is an essential to you is like weirdly it's a personal choice, but I'm with you, Iriel.
Um, One other another question that I had, was you spoke a little bit about flexibility in changing your prices, say at a farmer's, like different times of the season when demand is different and so forth. Um, Besides supply, is there any etiquette maybe between these three types of markets in how often you could change those prices? Like if it was every week at the farmer's market, is that acceptable or is that going to throw people off too much? And then even at sort of this intermediate scale, um, I don't know, what are the constraints of how much you can fluctuate with your pricing? Based on the art
Right.
of it all, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. And like again, so not even intuitive, but just like kind of the answer is relational, right? So it's going to be like based on how I receive the feedback I've been given by people. But I would say my instinct from doing it is that your true wholesale and your intermediate wholesale prices can change a lot more than your retail price. The reason for that is that what you are actually doing in the retail relationship is that you are building like trust and relationship with the end user so much. It is way more values based. It's like way more about your relationship with the person instead of a business relationship. Think of it in that way, I think is a nice way to put it, is like you are in a direct relationship with the person who's buying from you retail. You owe each other more. You are looking into the eyes of the person that is taking that food home and cooking it, and or those flowers, or whatever, what have you. In an intermediate wholesale or a true wholesale relationship, they're reselling something too, so they're fully in it as a business person as well. It is business person to business person. In a retail relationship, it is business person to end user, to community member. And so when you change a price really frequently in a retail setting, it's affecting somebody's, like, certainly there's trickle down of intermediate wholesale and true wholesale changing, but other entities along the way can buffer those price changes, right? Your wholesaler could, if they don't want to change the price for their end customer, they could take a little bit of a hit. But in retail, you're passing it directly onto your customer. So the difference between, a dollar in the price per pound of your tomato, or yeah, let's say your tomatoes retail, might mean somebody doesn't get tomatoes that day. And so there's no hard and fast to what I just said, but it's just that you should have like more thought and intention when you're changing your retail prices. And you should think about what that consistency means. And anyone who's ever changed their retail prices knows that you will hear about it at market. Like people will be like, and they'll say things that aren't meant to be hurtful or thoughtless, but they're not thinking about, again, you're in an individual relationship. People are not always thinking about who you are in the situation. So people will be like, I can't believe corn costs this much. And it can feel really personal. So I think just remembering how personal a retail relationship is as opposed to the others. And I think you also want to be thinking about how much management a relationship with you takes. So if you are going to be changing your prices frequently, then you need to have a hot sheet that you are sending to people, because they don't want to call you all the time and find out your price is different. They want to get something in their email or their mail or in their hands that shows them what their price is, so they don't have to ask these questions like back to the cartoon back and forth. They want to be able to see it. So a lot of wholesale stuff fluctuates every single week. Um, if you're purchasing like flowers in bulk, I mean, honestly, I purchase from a wholesaler quite frequently with local vegetables, and their stuff fluctuates every 3 days, but they have a living place where you can see that price. And so that would be a best practice if in wholesale or intermediate wholesale you wanted to have a price fluctuate. You need to be able to be in front of that communication and have your end customer not have to seek that information out with you. Because if every time they call you, you're like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but that's going to be $1 more, that's going to be their memory of their relationship with you, is that every time they talk to you, something's different, which is much different than opening their email and being like, oh, okay, Margie's got tomatoes this week, and that makes sense. Like, it's the first week they're coming on, they're $1 more because there's like fewer on the market, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally makes sense. And it made me think too, sort of again, different perspectives that a farmer's market customer is coming at it with than a wholesale buyer. Even if that customer has an idea of what their food budget is, wholesale buyers are knowing how to maintain their own business and where their wiggle room is. So I could see the opportunity to speak numbers in a more concrete way than somebody who's feeling that maybe more emotionally. Um, well,
Yeah.
anybody else have questions? I don't want to take up the whole questionnaire part.
Okay, I've got one in the chat. How would you recommend pricing when dealing with produce hitting the end of their shelf life or has sat on the table all market? Ooh, that is like, I think that becomes very intuitive, which is not to say like no answer. It's just like if you're 10 minutes from market ending and stuff has been in the sun and you know like it's got to be cooked tonight or whatever, I will like load people up because it goes back to that thing of people will remember how like what the experience of purchasing with you was. And if you're gonna have to compost it anyway, like sometimes if there's like 4 pounds of something left and that's all that's left, which everybody intuitively knows this, but when there's only a little bit left on your table, people do not approach you because they're like, oh, weird, it's too sparse. That's where that stack it high and watch it fly comes from. So if you're like, it's hot, it's the end of market, I have 4 pounds of sweet potatoes left on the table, no one is approaching me. If someone approaches you and is like, I will take 1 pound of sweet potatoes, should absolutely just be like, cool, here's 4 pounds of sweet potatoes. I don't want to pack them up in my car. And say things like that so they understand why you're giving them, a discount, right? Like your product is good, it is special, but you're letting them in on the idea that like this is how the life of a farmer goes. Like I don't want to bring home 3 extra pounds of sweet potatoes because my family's been eating sweet potatoes nonstop. We don't need these 3 pounds of sweet potatoes. And this, if I clear this, I can actually like, go get a beer afterwards. I don't have to go home and unload, whatever it is. So I think that you can be, if you are certain the product is not going to sell, you should absolutely be generous. There's no reason not to be. But I don't think that there is a strategy for doing that. I just think it goes back to that thing of always making sure people understand where you're coming from or why you're doing it, and absolutely do it in a convivial way. But like, we want to be valuing food and the labor it takes to grow food, even when we're giving it away. Anything else from anybody? Oh, and the other thing I'd say is like if selling seconds to people who are doing value add processing, that's a different thing. And I will expand on that a little bit, which is that you should definitely try to have a relationship, with someone who wants to buy like your bruised up berries or things that are coming back from market. And the price there can honestly be like break even if you don't have a good composting system or if they're like, I'll throw in some jelly for you, but don't go below break even. Because if you go below break even for selling food or bringing it to someone, right? If you go below break even for that, then you are actually you are costing yourself money to donate that food. So what you can do in a situation like that is you can also have people come pick it up at the end of market. Like just don't add extra cost onto onto selling your food. So at that point, if you're going below break even, I would say donate it instead of, having to try to figure out a business relationship because the position you'll get into if you have like a very low quality product and you're selling it at a serious enough loss to yourself is inevitably that customer will complain because to them they are a customer, they will have an issue, and what you will know in your head is I am actually losing money selling this to you. And so that's a power imbalance that'll be like obfuscated to them and it's not fair. I would say, like if you have a person that makes great jelly and you know that like if you sell them, the blueberries for like $1 on the pound, um, because like they're all banged up, that, that's still like a huge loss to you. I would say just like give that person blueberries and ask for jelly. If you're going to be already, if you needed to make $10 a pound and you're making $1 a pound, like get some jelly for that. That's like you guys exchanging labor or bartering. But I would not encourage anyone to make a sale below their break even.
Beautiful. Unless anybody else has some questions, I think that all of the wisdom that's been shared today could, I think that's a good note to end on. Um, so yeah, thank you, Margie, for presenting. And I just want to let you know too, the whole time, even though we were hidden, I was chuckling at all the jokes you
Oh,
were
good.
making.
You truly never know.
Yeah. So those were all very much appreciated. And yeah, in general, you're
I
very much
I was also giggling a lot too, Margie. I was like, man,
fun.
I should have like been filming myself just for you to see it, so you could see the feedback because it is difficult to be just talking to blank
There is
screens.
nothing like making a joke you've never made before to
Yeah,
a picture of like a blank slide,
of just
like a bunch of
yourself. Yeah,
text.
yeah.